So I'd like to take this opportunity now to introduce our next speaker, who is joining us from the UK via Skype this morning. Dr. Lena Dominelli is Professor of Applied Social Sciences and co-director of the Institute of Hazard, Risk, and Resilience Research at Durham University. She is currently the chair of the International Association of Schools of Social Work, ASCW, Committee on Disaster Interventions, Climate Change, and Sustainability. She represents social work at the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change and also at the United Nations International Strategy on Disaster Risk Reduction, known as UNISDR. In 2012, she published Green Social Work that examines environmental issues from a social work perspective and includes the important voices of the practitioners in the aftermath of disasters. We have a copy of her book here today, if you're interested in taking a look at it as a resource. And Dr. Dominelli is also a member of our Rebuilding Lives Post-Disaster Research Partnership. So thank you, Lena, for joining us today.
Thank you, Julie, for that warm introduction. And I just wish I could be there with all of you because it sounds like such fun. But I'm here and it's just started raining in Durham, but otherwise I'm fine. So what I want to talk about, and it's a shame I can't see you, but hopefully you can all see me and the screen. So I'm going to talk to you about green social work and argue that environmental justice is central to social justice, that we can no longer talk about social justice without talking about the environment. And I'm going to give you a brief introduction into what green social work is, where it's being used by different practitioners, and how it links social workers with other people in the academy, especially the physical scientists, so that we work together in transdisciplinary evidence-based teams to really develop very good disaster interventions that put people at the center. And hang on, somebody's at the door and I'm not expecting anyone. I'm on Skype.
Well, I thought you were coming.
No, I'm doing the talking, so I'll see you. It's our security guy because everybody else is gone. His name is Michael. He's very nice. He keeps checking up on me to make sure that I do go home sometime. Anyway, as I was saying, the green social work is community-based and participative because it takes its instructions from the communities and the people that we work with. It also links social policy and practice together, and it's transdisciplinary so that we work together with people. Now, I'm not going to bore you because I only have 15 minutes with kind of like how I developed this, but it's taken since basically 2004, and the Institute of Hazard, Risk, and Resilience was really important in that. But on this slide, you can see that it also feeds into the global agenda for social work, and there is going to be a handbook for green social work launched at the 2018 Congress of Social Work in Dublin. So I hope you'll all come there, and I'm sure Julie will tell you more about it. But the photo you see here is actually one of social work students, practitioners, and academics in Sri Lanka, where green social work really first began in the 2004 tsunami. And what I've done, I'm not going to read the slides out because I said you could have them, so Julie will pass them on to you if you want them. But I want to just mention on this slide why green social work, why I've called it that, not ecological social work or environmental social work. And the reason for this is that I'm actually trying to link the personal with the structural, the political with the social, and to offer a critique of neoliberal capitalism and how it exploits people and the environment when we should be looking at the connections and interconnections between us so that we look after planet Earth in the same way the planet Earth looks after us. And I think some of you who are from Canada will know that our First Nations over there actually make the same kind of connections. And I also argue for the equitable distribution of the Earth's resources, including transfers of the green technology from the West to every other country in the world, so that we can reduce our footprint in meeting people's needs. And it's really important that we do this because sustainability, which lies at the heart of green social work, is actually about protecting the environment so that we can take care of our needs today and also leave good stuff for the people of the future who are going to come after us. But not only people, but plants and animals and the physical environment itself. So I've tried, by doing that, I've tried to move out of the kind of anthropomorphic view of the environment, which I think is there in much environmental social work. And I've been intrigued to see that New Zealand is now arguing that the earth has rights, which will be really interesting to kind of explore at some point in the future. So basically what you have in this chart in front of you is how green social work practice is about empowering socially just practice. And that is good because it means that all of us who've been involved in social work know what that means. We do it all the time. And it draws on our value base and human rights orientation. And we've added on the tackling environmental degradation and risks to tackling social resource and structural inequalities. And I think it's quite interesting that the two photographs that you see there, the first one is actually an ancient place in Japan, which just shows you the harmony of the environment and people and everything else. It looks beautiful, doesn't it? Of course, in those days, it was mainly rich people who lived there, but I'm going to take you down to the bottom picture, which is Victoria, the Burnside Gorge, where they've, the social workers have developed a roof garden, which is really, really interesting, and they won a platinum award for this. So I just want to say that all of us can have roof gardens, but remember, if you have one, you need to be able to carry the weight of everything you put on the roof, and you need 9 membranes to be able to do that. So don't just put everything up and think it'll work, because in China they did this and they had a disaster because the roof collapsed. So think. The other thing that I think is really important for us to understand is that green social work is actually, it goes through stages that most of you will understand. At the heart of it, because it's community-based and people-centered in terms of who we work with, even though we protect everybody and everything, it's community engagement and co-production. So the participative element is right there at every single stage. And I've identified the stages because I tried to put it in a way that social workers would understand. So we all know how to do risk assessments. So when you're in a disaster, you should do this before a disaster strikes. Like, what's the hazard? What's the risk of it either burning down in the case of a forest fire, or an earthquake, as the people in BC on the west coast have to worry about, or flooding, as the people in Calgary had to worry about. You have to think of these things before they happen to develop preventative plans and to try and do what I call mitigation planning. Mitigation planning is when you understand your hazard and the risks, and then you think, okay, how can we reduce them before anything happens so that we can protect people's lives, we can protect animals and plants and the environment, but also how do we mitigate the disaster that might happen if things go wrong, especially like if there's a sudden flood. What do you need to know about what you need to do? The same thing with an earthquake or a bushfire. And then thinking about it beforehand, with prevention being really important, you try to develop an action plan that will take care of all the risks and the hazards that you can foresee. And then you have it ready for action so that when you're in a disaster, everyone knows what to do. So you really have to plan before the disaster comes. as well as being prepared to take action when the disaster happens. And if you've had action planning beforehand, it really helps because you will know what to do. And this is really important in disasters because your local community, your friends, your neighbors, your relatives are usually the first people to come to your assistance. So if you've talked about this beforehand, you will know what to do because everybody will have their roles and tasks assigned to them. And we're just doing some of this in China at the moment, where people wanted to worry about hailstones. So we dealt with that. And then we said, what about earthquakes? Oh, no, we don't have earthquakes. We said, well, you will. So let's talk about what you might need to do. Because we don't know when it'll happen, but we know it will. But it could be after your lifetime. And then everybody laughs, as you guys did. And it means we can have a discussion. But then you're prepared for what is normally a shock, which is the unexpected happens. You don't want it to happen. And here in London, we had Westminster Bridge terrorist attack the other day. But because people had been practicing what to do, the response was really quick and really helpful because it meant that people were able to be responded to very quickly. And then once the shock happens, of course, you implement your action plan. This time you will have had lots of thinking and talking about it. But after you've implemented it again, you need to evaluate it and sort of learn. And then you start the cycle all over again. So you go right back and forth. So I don't know if any of you have found this is the way you operate. So you might want to talk about that when we have a few questions at the end. But I also thought it was really important to tell you that social workers have a lot of roles that we can play in promoting environmental justice. And I've written them down on the slide in front of you, but I want to talk about the picture for a minute because this is about a place in Argentina. This is called the Ureta tree. And women used to have to go and gather these to get firewood for cooking, heating, and some lighting as well for certain points in the day. And the tree was becoming extinct. You can see the terrain is pretty tough. But what happened was that some community development workers decided to work with them and with a local NGO. And they decided to bring in solar panels and solar-powered stoves. So that meant that the solar panels could provide heating and lighting. The stoves were used for cooking. And each person, this was in a place with 40,000 people, each person suddenly did not use 2,000 tons of carbon dioxide emissions. They saved it every year. So this one community saved 80,000 tons of carbon dioxide emissions. And the Ureta tree is growing back again. As you can see where it was dying out and it's kind of like being rebuilt. So it's off the endangered list as long as people carry on using their solar powered energy. And it was really interesting that, you know, this all came because a community development worker realized that they could help people. And from a gender perspective, it meant women no longer spent hours going to collect firewood and everything else. So it was a win-win situation, which is really good, and we need more of those. The green social work is also part of the global agenda for social workers. The global agenda has 4 pillars. One is socioeconomic inequalities. Another one is respect and dignity of the person. Then environmental and community sustainability, which is what this one is, green social work. And this is the one that will be in Dublin in 2018. We'll be discussing this. So when the call for papers comes out, I hope you will all try and get there. Dublin's lovely to visit. And the 4th one will be interpersonal relations, but we're focusing on this one. And it builds on the Sustainable Development Goals, which are now in existence between 2015 and 2030. There are 17 goals. eliminating poverty, sustaining the environment, having resilient communities is all part of that. They're actually very, very good, but I did critique them on behalf of the profession because they have no sanctions for countries, because they're country-based, that do not do what they say they will do. So this is something that social workers can lobby about. As I said, it's one of the roles that we have. These built on the Rio 20 process, the World Urban Forum, and also the Sendai framework for environmental disasters, which I also represented social work on. And I was one of the, well, there were several groups of us, but we were part of a social movement on gender. We got gender mentioned 6 times, and I was also part of the disability movement group, and we got disability mentioned for the first time ever twice. So the Hyogo framework, which preceded the Sendai framework, did not mention disabled people at all. And then we were there, and Julie was there, and a few other people were there too, talking about social work's role on climate change, because we had a side event organized for that at the COP21, which led to the Paris Agreement. And I think you can all feel really pleased that at least Justin Trudeau is not doing a Donald Trump and is supporting that adherence to the Paris Agreement. And it's really, I think, crucial that social workers keep pressure upon governments, because again, like the Sustainable Development Goals, there is no sanction if they don't comply. So pressure from the grassroots, I think, is really important to deal with that. And why is it a social work issue across the globe? Well, because we all have poverty in our countries. We're seeing growing social inequalities. Apparently in the UK, 5 families have more money and wealth between them than 50% of the British population, which I think is obscene. But in the wider global picture, we have 1 billion people with no clean drinking water. So we can help with building infrastructures for water, sanitation, electricity. We can also prevent hunger because we can use green agriculture, which doesn't destroy the environment like a lot of the agribusiness does. At the same time, we have people who are malnourished because they might eat enough, but the food they eat isn't very good for them, and it's just carbohydrates and not much else. And 1 billion people overconsume. So we have these gross inequalities between those who are food secure and those who are food insecure. And it can lead to riots, as it did in 2008. And also we have, because we're not very careful with the air and the environment linked to the atmosphere, we have 7 million people die of air pollution, indoor and outdoor, every year, which is terrible. And 15 million people die of diseases that could be cured cheaply and easily if we looked at the environment as an integral whole in terms of people's health and protecting their health. And then just to ram the message home, the Global South bears most of the damages caused by disasters, and most of the people affected by them live in the Global South, and most of the economic losses occur there. Even though this picture is actually of England during the 2013 floods, when we had some of the worst floods we've seen for a very long time. But we haven't learned many lessons out of it, I have to say. And then just on this slide, this is kind of like saying, here's what we do, again, just to make sure you haven't missed anything. It's the last slide, and it's the model that I use when I'm working. Like, this is me in Ingxio, in the school that was the whole of the school was destroyed by the 2008 earthquake in Sichuan in China. And we did a lot of work with them, and a part of the response is to use their own ritual and culture to kind of like get them to think positively and grow. We call this grow resilience. And then, of course, I have to dance with them and wear their clothes. And it's really quite funny because I can barely fit into them. And yet I'm not the world's fattest woman either, but it's really quite funny. So just have a good laugh. And then this one is where it's in South Africa. This is my friend Antoinette Lombard, who's the head of social work at the University of Pretoria. And she's got students working to recycle people's way out of poverty. And this is a community out in the countryside. And these women are actually using bottled water bottles, empty bottles, and they turn them into big long strips of plastic, which they then knit to make things. They make jackets, boots, shoes, everything. So this is a hat that they made, which I love. And this woman made that hat. And Antoinette bought a handbag or I guess a purse, a shoulder strap purse, you would call it in Canada. And this woman made that. And they wanted their pictures taken with us because they were so pleased we bought them. But this is where, you know, we're trying to say people have to have agency and decide in their own way how to deal with the disasters that affects them. This one was earthquake, this one's poverty. And then we bring resources in there, and our resources are both internal to the community, so we use their strengths and build on those, but we also bring external resources. Sometimes it's money, sometimes it's knowledge, sometimes it's other people, but we're always aware of power relations and why participation is so important, because we want them to be the drivers of their destiny and not us. So there's no kind of neo-colonial imperialism, as Naomi Klein says in the Shock Doctrine. And we always share knowledge, but we also know that they know an awful lot. So we try to use their knowledge to build on it, and then to have dialogue between what they know and what the scientists know. And it's quite interesting how many cultures have myths that go back many, many years that people could use to protect themselves from current hazards. And the best known example was, that I know that is, was one in Sri Lanka where a young girl had been told at school that 1,000 years earlier there had been a tsunami in Sri Lanka, and that when the sea goes away, you run away from the sea, not towards it. So in her village, she made everyone run away from the sea, and there was not a single death there, whereas in some of the other villages nearby, the destruction was almost total. So it's really important that we look for whatever is there in the socio-economic context and in the physical environment that we can use to help people prepare and mitigate risks. And then, you know, this is really that other thing that I showed you before, but we're in adaptation now because climate change, for instance, we will never go back to kind of like pre-industrial levels unless we stop using fossil fuels, and even then it would take 100 years to clear out what's in the earth already, both the soil, the atmosphere, and the waters, the oceans. So if we're going to be resilient as a planet, as people, as animals, plants, the minerals and everything else that we use, we've got to really change our lifestyles. And so green social work is a tiny step on that long journey, but it gives us a lot of knowledge and the tools. And I do have toolkits as well that I've developed on the basis of this that we don't have time to go into. So yeah, it's kind of like it's all there, and I'd love to see you all develop your own versions of it in your own places, because I think it's really exciting and definitely needed. So I just want to say thank you, and we have some time for questions and maybe some discussion.
Yes, does anyone have a question or comment for Lena? Okay. I could also, oh, yes, okay. Yes, well, we're just going to bring you the microphone, okay? Desley has a question for you, Lena.
All right. Okay. Hi, Desley. Nice to hear from you, even if I can't see you.
Oh, I can see you. Lena, thank you for your presentation. I guess I just want to ask a question about the concept of resilience. And I'm seeing increasingly that it's being used in the emergency management context in pushing responsibility far more onto the individual rather than looking at it as a community or a shared private public responsibility. And I'm wondering if you could comment on your experience with that.
Yeah, I certainly can. The UK is the most awful society for doing that, because it even has a program called the Big Society, which is all about cutting back the welfare state and telling people to pull their bootstraps up and get out and work and find their own resources. I think it's a misuse of the term resilience, but they can do that because the term originally came from engineering, where it was about the capacity of a material to withstand pressure on it. And what they don't understand is that people aren't materials, and that people will not withstand all kinds of pressure, and that if you push people too much, they will also break like the material does. And I have tried to reconceptualize it, and it is in green social work. I have talked about it as a property that is both individual and collective, that it does not take away from the responsibility of a community and a society to provide resources for people. And most of the material that I use in disaster interventions is about how do we get the resources that the people need here, because there is a social responsibility which the state particularly should be observing. But unfortunately, because of neoliberalism, most states, especially in the West, and even in the Nordics countries, there's a growth and a support for neoliberal views which put all the emphasis on the individual. And if they're not careful, they're going to destroy notions of community. And I think you saw it in Brexit and also in Trump, where people who always been excluded and wanted resources like housing, employment, education, health services, and not getting them, are now kind of saying, well, we don't want anybody here because we need to look after ourselves, and let's look after our own. But of course, that's not going to happen. And you can see it with Trump. You know, if he'd got his repeal of Obamacare, it would have meant that the people who were the poorest and in greatest need of health care would have suffered most. And you know, but he doesn't realize that, and peddles this kind of view that people are resilient because they voted him in. And just like the Brexiteers, they've taken 40 years to tell people lies about the EU. And now they're beginning to wake up to the fact, actually, the EU was a great supporter of solidarity and the basis of resilience for many areas in the UK, which would have been a lot poorer if it hadn't been there. So I'm waiting for kind of like professional discourses, and we haven't got them in the UK except for the lone voices, usually within social work, but also some economists in the UK are saying this too, like some of the radical economists are saying, you know, resilience has a social component to it. If you're not resilient as a society, your resilient individuals will be very limited in what they can do. So I hope that answered your question.
Very much, Lena. I'm afraid we're out of time, but I see your email address there, so if anyone is interested in following up with you, perhaps they could contact you by email.
They'd be more than welcome, yes. And
okay.
Do give them the slides. I'm happy for them to be shared. So, well, thank you so much. I'm sorry that I can't be with you, but we'll hopefully be able to find out what you're doing from Julie and the rest of you that I know who are there. And hello and goodbye to everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Okay. Bye, Lena. Thanks.